The Aurelia Museum of Art and History is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We respect and observe the long and enduring presence of Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit on this land. Their teachings and stewardship, culture, and way of life have shaped our city's unique identity.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the History Speaker Series. We are thrilled that you're choosing to spend your evening with us tonight. We have a phenomenal topic, one that I'm sure is of personal interest to many of you watching. I certainly feel that way. First, we have Charlie, who it is my honor to be able to introduce this evening. So, folks, if you do have any questions for Charlie coming up, you'll be able to put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them after Charlie's talk. But over to Charlie. So Charlie is an avid boater and has been all his life. Charlie spent a considerable amount of time on boats on Lake Couchiching and throughout the Trent-Severn Waterway. Charlie, a retired teacher, has taught navigation and safe boating for over 50 years with the Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons, and he is the port captain for the Great Lakes Cruising Club. There are few who are more expertly qualified to speak on tonight's topic than Charlie Ellens, who has traveled the Trent-Severn many, many times in both directions and in various boats. Please welcome Charlie Ellens. Thank you so much for being here this evening, Charlie. I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the museum and friends for inviting me to speak this evening about the Trent-Severn Waterway. I kind of took the liberty of changing it a little bit where the Trent-Severn Waterway would talk about then, which would be some history, and also talk about now. So ultimately, it's going through time and bringing us sort of to the current time. Through my memories and for things that have been written down over the years. There are so many articles about the history of the Trent-Severn Waterway. If you live in a neighborhood that borders on the Trent or you cottage on the Trent and you want to find out more information, just Google Sturgeon Lake, for example, and you'll have all kinds of information about when it became the attraction, the tourist attraction that it is now. So the valleys of the Trent, and I won't read exactly everything that I show you on the screen. The valleys of the Trent-Severn and Trent Rivers form sort of the backbone of the Trent-Severn Waterway. Some of the waterway is canals that have been, we say, man-made, but many are just the Severn and Trent Rivers. So that's a good thing because they've probably been around for over 3,000 years. In the Trent-Severn Waterway, to the north part, the Hurons, referred to as the Wendat, and then to the south were the Iroquois, mostly from upper New York State. And for some reason, they both used this route to attack each other. Not far from Port Severn, Samuel de Champlain, he was about in the early 1600s. And once again, you can look up Samuel de Champlain and see all kinds of interesting things about his involvement, what he was commissioned to do, basically to come and set up something more so in Quebec, but it worked quite a bit in Upper Canada. So he took sides against the Iroquois, and I think he had befriended the Hurons. But anyways, some years it was an extermination of the missionaries. So that whole area by Martyr Shrine in Midland and St. Marie among the Hurons, that tourist attraction, and other white folks that died in this massacre. That's all very well described, and there are lots of things to see. When we talk about the Trent-Severn Waterway, we look at the region. Basically, you can see how it's divided into sort of the Severn region, which is sort of Washago North, the Simcoe region, which is around Lake Simcoe. That's many people who holiday there. Then the area that's called the Scugog region. For some reason, Lake Scugog somehow gets missed on some of the tours traveling across the Trent-Severn Waterway, partly because it's off the beaten track to some extent. You make a turn in Sturgeon Lake, go southerly to Lindsay, and then to Lake Scugog, and there is a lock at Lindsay. We'll be speaking probably primarily of the other parts that include other parts of the Kawartha region, like Bobcaygeon and right down to Lakefield. And then there's the Rice Lake region, which is Peterborough, and then the Trent region, which is from Trenton right through. So Trenton, Campbellford, and so forth. So I've made the trip in both directions, not recently, but within the last 10 years. And it's really interesting. And I'm not speaking about things that you need to have a boat to see. Many of those cities and towns and hamlets that are marked on this map, you can drive to. So if you have one of those opportunities where you have visitors to Ontario or to your area or to your cottage, you can take them around to see some of the things that are, we're proud of on the Trent-Severn Waterway. So basically in the timelines, the British and the Irish were really the first immigrants to settle around along Upper Canada's, most desirable water route. The fur trade, and that's, I think, what attracted Samuel de Champlain and other explorers to the area, eventually was replaced by wood and now water power and some wood. The very first lock was in Bobcaygeon, built in 1833. It had wooden walls. The existing lock at Bobcaygeon nowadays, so now it's not wood at all, it's cement. What happened was in 1837, there was the Upper Canada Rebellion. And so the additional locks beyond Bobcaygeon they were put on hold. Then there's a number of politicians got involved. John A. Macdonald, he got construction restarted. And Wilfrid Laurier, there was some resumption of the canal between Peterborough and Lake Simcoe. And then the World War I, of course, halted any production or any construction of the waterway. In 1918, the canal then was connected to Trenton and finally totally completed to Georgian Bay in 1920. Here are some numbers about the waterway. It's 386 kilometers long. The two sets of flight locks. What we mean by flight locks is you go into one lock, you either go up or go down, and then you move into a second lock and then out. There are two hydraulic lift locks. I think the one at Peterborough is the most popular, but there's also one very close to, if you're living in the area, you can drive to that location within an hour and get very close. You can see how it operates. And the good time to get excited starts this weekend when the waterway opens. There's a marine railway at the Big Chute, which you can access if you're driving and go to Coldwater, and then you can turn off there and follow the beaver signs. And previously, there was a marine railway at Swift Rapids. So in the early years of the waterway, there were two marine railways. Now there's only one. And why do we still have one at the Big Chute? Well, it turned out that there's a concern that the lamprey eel would come up from Georgian Bay and be an issue with the fishermen that fish on the waterway. There are 39 swing bridges. That means that they need to move open and close if the vessels are larger. There are 160 dams on the waterway, and they control well, they call it flood control, water levels in those lakes that feed the Trent-Severn waterway. So folks in places like Shadow Lake may find their water level drop faster in the summer than others, just because those lakes that feed the Trent, the tributaries, the Burnt River and so on, are all controlled by these dams. And there's about 125,000 private and commercial properties along its route. We're not really speaking so much about the lakes like Lake Simcoe, but along the routes, the canal parts and the river parts. And there are 18 hydroelectric generating facilities. Orillia, for one, gets its electricity from what they call Hydro Glenwell. It's actually the Swift Rapids Lock. And there's some photos coming up later. You can see the generating facility beside the lock. And that sends electricity down to Orillia. And previously it was Orillia Water, Light and Power. Now it's part of Ontario Hydro. This is a view from where I grew up, and I arrived on the scene when I was first born. The family cottage on Lake Couchiching, and if you look across, what you're looking at there is basically the green area there there's a point, that's Geneva Park, and that's undergoing a change of ownership. Kind of behind that, the birch tree is Camp Wahanoan, and then off to the left is some more, such as the Ontario Educational Leadership Center, which is now part of RAMA. So my memories of growing up on the Trent-Severn Waterway include our first boat, and then those after. First boat was a 16-foot built in the Peterborough area. It was a cedar strip, had a hardtop, a plexiglass window, even in those days, 1955, and the largest outboard that Evinrude made, and it was 25 horsepower. I also remember, I have memories of day tripping on the waterway, whether it be in that boat, other boats, my grandfather's boat, and just paddling up there, although I only really did it once and then I got tired. Going up to Sparrow Lake and to Port Stanton. Chief's Island, which is off to the right in the photograph. Water skiing on Lake Couchiching. We were among the first on the lake to have water skis. I guess we had a boat with enough power, 25 horsepower, to pull most of us as kids. Going down to Couchiching Beach Park and the PAV. More to come on that in a few moments. Orillia's waterfront before the Port of Orillia. The Port of Orillia started to sort of come into being around 1990. So prior to 1990, and I was alive then, I have memories of the waterfront, which was really one long government wharf. I have memories of cruising to Balsam Lake and onwards. Bad memory of a marina fire where we lost our cabin cruiser, and Fern Cottage, now called Fern Resort. So a little more on that coming up in this story. I'd like to talk also about the Capri. This was the middle 1950s, and this is a vessel, the Capri. It belonged to the Phelps family out of Orillia, and they would leave Orillia on a Friday night. They would travel up to Lock 42 and then back again on Sunday. So that was their weekend. And I remember how horrified everyone was, because they said, how much do you think it costs to take that boat from Orillia to Lock 42, 15 miles, and back again for the weekend? And everybody said, isn't that awful? It cost $20, but we're talking 1955. And there's some other good stories that go with this 1955 and onwards with the Capri. For example, the radio station in Orillia went up to 5,000 watts. And the Smith family, that were the owners of the radio station, happened to have and invite a comedian, movie star, whatever, by the name of Bob Hope, up for a day's fishing. And I understand it was a very jovial day as they went out on the Capri. That's a memory I have because Friday night I could see the Capri going down the lake to my left from that picture you just saw, and then Sunday it would come back down. And when you're talking about 50 feet, it was a big boat to see at that time because we had a 16-footer and we thought it was big enough. Certainly is when you're standing trying to paint the bottom. The Stantons, Port Stanton, where the Stanton brothers' store was, this is a 1930s picture. And we would go up there, but not in 1930. After that, when we had our boat in the 50s and 60s and 70s, made a nice trip to leave Lake Couchiching and go up through the Waterway up to Port Stanton and grab an ice cream, maybe some lunch, tie up at the government wharf there, spend a few hours, turn around and come back. Port Stanton, if I could refer to Captain Thomas Stanton, those were his ages, 1842 to 1907. He was a steamer captain, lumberman, farmer, and a tourist operator. And he came from Great Britain and moved to Sparrow Lake in 1875. And there, he would pick up passengers at Severn Bridge, bring them up to Sparrow Lake, and he set up in due time a tourism business. Now, originally, the Stantons were over on kind of the west side of the lake, and there was really no road in there, and there was no opportunity for his children to go to school. So they moved to the south end where the railway was, and it was much closer to, we'll call it civilization. He had some boats, the Spartan, Lady Franklin, Lakefield, and the Glimpse, all different sizes, but they would go and pick up passengers. They would go, and a lot of people came for fishing to the Sparrow Lake, many of them from the Pittsburgh area. Unfortunately, in October of 2020, the Stanton family, you say restaurant, ice cream bar, store, which at that time was unoccupied. It was just storage. It had an unfortunate fire and was burned to the ground. My next slide talks about a typical summer weekend on Lake Couchiching. Right there is Chiefs Island, and you can see the number of boats that are anchored in the bay. You'll see different colors of water. That means there's some swimming. You can stand where the shallower water is and spend the afternoon there. Aurelia's waterfront, well, this is an older picture. Right in the middle, coming down the middle is basically Mississauga Street. Then here was a government wharf, mostly cement. And then over here, where these boathouses and those boats are, that was Hunter Boats. And we'll be speaking about that in a few moments. We remember water skiing. A little more about Aurelia. I guess it's been home to me in the summer, and then eventually now that I moved up here. So it was the home of the Hunter shipyards, and they built the first Canadian fair miles. You may hear someone speak about fair miles. Basically, 7 were built at Aurelia out of 80, and for the Royal Canadian Navy, and they were effectively torpedo vessels, and they would were commissioned to go up and down the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts of Canada, watching for torpedo-type vessels, so submarines and so on. So they were basically sub-hunters. They were 115 feet long and about 17 feet wide, so you couldn't go over the marine railway with them. They were just too long and too wide, so they had to go the Trent-Severn Waterway to Lake Ontario. I'd like to speak a little bit about, remember I said a few moments ago about the PAV? It's kind of a teen club that was at Couchiching Beach Park. And it was a dance hall. You would know it as a dance hall. And it was mostly teenagers, so I was found there the odd weekend evening, probably Saturday night, because we came up from Toronto on Friday night to the cottage. Also wanted to mention about Fern Resort, used to be called Fern Cottage. In this 1950s picture, you can see a lot of rental cottages. If you were to go to Fern Resort today, it's more of a hotel-like resort because it got bigger and bigger, and the interest is there, and the family that are running it now are delighted that it's a landmark in the area. Here's a picture of Balsam Lake, taken recently, and right in the middle, that's what they call the Big Island. So where that shiny reflection of the sun is, you come out of the Trent-Severn Waterway, you go around that first thing, there are some markers here, you go all the way around Grand Island and you come out to Rosedale Lock.
My name is Alec McEachran and I'm the lock operator at Lock 35. This is my second year at Lock 35 Rosedale, and I've been with the Trent-Severn Waterway for 9 years. Well, I have been around the waterway my whole life. My father was a lock master and my mother was also a lock operator at one point. So I grew up coming to work with my dad and coming to the lock and being around the boats, and just grew up with it. Also, my great-grandfather, John, he was part of a work crew that helped construct the Talbot River section of the waterway. My experience as being a second-generation lock staff has been very rewarding. Got to meet people who've traveled up and down this waterway for many years and who knew my parents, and they're very excited to meet me and understand that I'm, trying to carry on the tradition. This current lock was built in 1910, and they refurbished it in 1968 and made it hydraulic. The very first lock built in Rosedale, they started building it in 1868 and they finished in 1872. I would say this lock is special because of the location. We have nice parkland with a lot of mature trees, and we're kind of secluded here, but we're just off the beaten path from Theming Falls and Bob-Cajun. We have 3 Authentics here in one cabin. They sleep 6 people each. You can come here and you're provided with drinking water, a shower, your own dock to use, and lots of nice parkland to enjoy. You also get a fire pit and a barbecue. The floaters that are planning to stop here, they should know that we have really good staff here who are willing to help, and all you have to do is come up and talk to us.
Okay, moving along, after you go through Rosedale, you come to Fenelon and also Bob-Cajun. The first lock on the waterway, which I referred to earlier, was built around June of 1833 when it opened, and it was a lock between Sturgeon and Pigeon Lakes. When that was done, there was really no other locks. They decided, for financial reasons, any location that had been designated as locks would just be sort of log slides, because there was still a lot of lumbering going on. So there were hundreds of public meetings, petitions, canal associations formed, editorials and letters to the editor. They were all part of the first phase of the Trent-Severn Waterway.
My name's Scott Worsley. I'm the lock master here in Bob-Cajun. I've been here at this lock for 15 years, but I've been actually on the waterway now for 18. It is 5.5 feet. Depending on the differential between the 2 lakes at the time, what lake level, it can be as high as a 6-foot lift. This lock is going to connect Sturgeon Lake to Pigeon Lake. And actually the lock right here, we're in what they call Big Bob River. Yeah, this lock we're in the middle of the river, really, between the 2 lakes. The lock itself is no more special than any of them on the system. Without any one lock all on the system, it's going to break the chain. What makes this one kind of special is the amount of activity that goes on. The people that are coming here on a constant basis and the reasons that they're coming here. But what I find interesting is what keeps bringing people back. This is a popular spot. This is a destination spot known to many that want to return here. For anybody that hasn't been to Bob-Cajun yet, you need to get yourself here. I think what you're going to find is that the atmosphere here is what's going to bring you back. For those of you that have already been here, I don't think I need to tell you that. I know you're coming back. So I'll be looking forward to seeing you again soon, and hope you have a very good day.
When I was talking about the fair miles, 100 boats at the waterfront of Aurelia, they were building these wooden torpedo boats during the war to patrol Canadian waters. And I spoke about their dimensions, anywhere from 15 to 13 foot 10, but once again, too large. So it took 4 days to go from Aurelia to Trenton. And they would have their crew in places like Bob Cajun, Peterborough. Weren't used to having sailors there, but they were there as part of the 4-day trip. In 1943, an explosion at the Hunter plant resulted in 7 injured and 1 killed. They'd all gone for dinner, leaving, well, might say a youth behind, about 16 years old. And he could hear something dripping, and it was gasoline. And it exploded, and he was thrown about 7 meters away from where he was standing, and of course killed. The Royal Canadian Legion doesn't want that to be forgotten, so they're planning a memorial near the site of 100 boats, which in the new waterfront of, you would say, Aurelia, they have the Legion. And between the Legion and where 100 boats is, there's some, there's an area in there where they could place a monument. So they've asked a particular monument company in town, currently in the city of Aurelia, to look at what could be designed, and working on a design and taking some designs and collecting some funds. And the good thing is that the city of Aurelia has given tacit approval to this memorial, and who knows, they may find some funds too. So there will be something there, a plaque that people can read about what happened at that time. Hunter Boats was rebuilt and then eventually burned to the ground without any loss of life, about 1990. This is a fair mile in the loch down towards Peterborough. Fair mile boats, PT boats, you might want to call it. There were many left over after the war, about 1945, 1946, that companies and private individuals purchased. One of them, and it may even have been this one, was purchased by the Dunkelman family of Tip Top Tailors, and they kept the boat down behind the Tip Top Tailor factory on Stadium Road at the exhibition in Toronto. So we've had some of this. I spoke about the Hurons and the Iroquois and the first lock. And the Trent-Severn Waterway was not all built at once. It was built in sections, and some areas weren't connected. Ultimately, when Samuel de Champlain, what he did was he went up the Ottawa River, came down the French River, came out into Georgian Bay, paddled back to what is now, would say, Port Severn, and then portaged all the way back down to Trenton, because there were no locks. We're talking a long time ago, like 1600s. And so it was exciting with the first lock put in 1833 for commercial purposes mostly, was the start of what's turned out to be a wonderful paradise for tourism, even though originally it was supposed to be for the military and commercial use. So it was the lumber business that brought about the Bob Cajun lock. Then, the system grew and the lumbering happened, and then the forests were denuded and the watersheds had to change, and farmers, because there was no lumber industry, deserted their lands. What they did was railroads then stretched into this part of the country, and the waterway, well, it basically didn't happen before 1918. As human interest was restored, forests got returned, and there was a change in nature. And the government over the last 40 years has spent millions of dollars bringing the system up to date. It wasn't always a heritage park. It was part of Transport Canada and then became part of Parks Canada. Some of the people in the history of the Trent-Severn Waterway: John A. Macdonald, politician; Wilfrid Laurier, another politician; the leaders of the federal parties; James Gray Bethune, who was, I don't think, related to Dr. Norman Bethune, but James Gray Bethune was in fact entrepreneur, industrialist, owned some railways. He thought about, well, let's, bring the railway up through to Rice Lake and up to Peterborough, because there may be some growth in there. He knew that maybe Rice Lake could go into something where their steamers could be. And so he was sort of at a lot. And you can look him up anytime and read about what he did and accomplished towards the waterway. Nicole Hugh Baird, he was a surveyor, did the early surveys of the Trent-Severn Waterway to determine the feasibility of building the Trent-Severn Waterway. So he was called upon a lot. First, he did his initial survey, put it into the government. They didn't do much about it. Then he did a resurvey to see if they could connect more areas so that eventually it would go Trenton to Port Severn. William Hamilton Merritt and William Mulock were members of Parliament. You may have heard about Mulock Drive up in Newmarket. If you are fortunate enough to ride the GO train, you will go past the old canal that was being built by Mulock to link Lake Simcoe southerly, to the Holland River. It never happened, it never opened, but it was just about all finished. Lots of people have painted parts of the Trent-Severn Waterway, and there's photographs all over the place. These two images were courtesy of the Museum of Art and History that's sponsoring this evening's discussions. The waterway is managed by Parks Canada. It's now a cruising destination. You'll hear people maybe refer to loopers. These are, and there hasn't been any for a couple of years due to COVID. They make a big circle called a loop, and they go from, they generally come from the south, like Florida. They come up the Intercoastal Waterway, cross Lake Ontario to Trenton, up the Trent-Severn Waterway, out to Georgian Bay, over to Chicago, and down the Mississippi, something that lots of people would love to do. The waterway has 43 locks. There's no lock 29. Where did it go? Well, there was a merging of a couple locks into one. For example, the Fenton Falls lock was a double lock at one time. There's an early picture, sketch of a steamer at the Peterborough lift lock. If you draw more than 5 feet under your boat, you may have difficulty with the waterway. So a lot of sailboats, if they're keel boats, they just can't make it. What they call the air draft, you need 22 feet is the maximum you could have, because a lot of bridges are just that height. I think the narrowest between Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching is like 19 feet. And if there's speed limits, it's 10 kilometers an hour. There's early pictures of, digging out the Peterborough lift lock area. And to the right, far right, that would be the early stage of building the first marine railway. This one would be probably Big Chute. This is the plaque that's erected at Peterborough for Richard Rogers, who, not related to Rogers and Hammerstein, he was an engineer who basically was in charge of the Peterborough lift lock. The lift lock, which is really a historic site, still exists, still works. It's got these two tubs. There's a big piston that holds up these tubs of water. And what happens is you drive in and the gate comes up behind you. The one straight ahead, that one can't come up. That goes down when you get to the bottom. And then you come down that height you can see the railing at the top there, and right down to the bottom, there is that gate that you saw. What we've got now is some stuff about this is the Fenland Falls lock in the middle of Fenland Falls. This is the town here. The main drag is across this bridge. There's everything from restaurants. I say check out the ice cream parlor at the top side of the lock. They've erected a few plaques and some historical monuments. Beyond Fenland Falls, you'll come to the Kirkfield lift lock. If you're trying to read the sign, all it's indicating is because this is the highest point on the waterway that you're now going downstream. So from Kirkfield to Port-Severn, you're going downstream. If you go in a lock, you're going down. You go into Coojaching Lock at Wishago, you're going down in the lock. And that means that the marker buoys change direction. In the middle of Canal Lake, which is the other side of Kirkfield, had been doing some work on this highway bridge. Once again, this highway bridge been there many years. You can see 1905 on the plaque, and just like anything else that gets old, parts of it need to be refurbished. And then this is a piece, the Talbot River part. I'll go back one that goes out to Lake Simcoe from the waterway out that you just saw a few moments ago. If we skip across Lake Simcoe and Lake Coojaching, we come to the Highway 11 bridge at the entrance to the Trent-Severn Waterway. So if you're headed up to the Muskokas, you will pass over the Trent-Severn Waterway. The other side of Lock 42 is the Hamlet Swing Bridge near Sparrow Lake. A lot of work has been done. That's not the newest picture. Once my boat's running, I'll get up that way and take a picture. The newer bridge is slightly higher and handles vehicle traffic better.
My name is Campbell Trubner. I'm a lockmaster on the Trent-Severn Waterway. I started on the Trent-Severn Waterway in 2006 as an operator at Lock 45. Lock 42 is very special because it was the last lock built to complete the whole system in 1920. So it was built for the purpose of connecting the system from end to end. And it's one of the larger locks on the system, and it's one of the busiest. An average lockage at Lock 42 can take about 12 minutes. Once the gates are closed, the transition time is between 7 and 8 minutes. It's a big lock, and we often have to fill it tight, so it can sometimes take 15 minutes to do a full transition. A typical day at 42, when we get going, it's busy here. We got a lot of traffic coming off of Lake Simcoe, Lake Coojaching that want to go to the Big Chute or out to Georgian Bay. It can get tough because we're dealing with the two bridges at either end, the CN Bridge and then our bridge at Hamlet. We sell a lot of permits here. A lot of sales happen here, so that's always a challenge when trying to get boats through quickly. I guess the favorite part about my job is talking to the people. I like interacting and knowing where the boaters are going and what they're doing, you know, where they like to see things. That's what makes the job special. Thanks for stopping by Lock 42. We look forward to seeing you again.
The next part takes us the other side of Sparrow Lake to what's called Hydro Glen. You can see a bridge there. That was a place where the train actually would a train from carrying passengers, say from Toronto, or would stop. To the right in the picture, there was a spot there with stairway down. They could get out of the train and come down to the waterway and then take some kind of a vessel from there onwards to cottages. to fishing camps and so forth. Just past this, the Hydro Glen, comes the Swift Rapids Lock. It was where there was a marine railway. It was taken out because there was a backup there. It took a long time to get through the waterway. So this was built many years ago. And there's a dam beside it. There it is there. And that is actually the electric dam that, hydroelectric dam that feeds electricity to Aurelia and that part. In the spring, when the water's rushing out, those two big scoops where it says danger, that water just gushes out of there. So you don't want to be anywhere close to it. And that's why they've got the yellow thing. The next stop after that turns out to be the Marine Railway. The Marine Railway takes you from an upper part down to the lower part, which goes out into Gloucester Pool. The boats are actually taken out of the water. You don't need to get off the boat. The very first Marine Railway and the second Marine Railway, only the captain could be on. But now with the sling system, the boats go right in. People can stay on the boat. And when it gets down to the bottom, the boats go out. And then we're on from Gloucester Pool to Port-Severn.
My name is Neil Morrow, and I am the lock operator at Lock 45 in Port-Severn. This is my 6th summer on the Waterway, 4 as a student, and this is my 2nd as an operator. I got started from just living down the street from Lock 45 in Port-Severn here. Also, my grandfather worked on the Waterway back in the 1950s, and my father helped construct Swift Rapids in 1964. Also, my brother and sister worked on the Waterway, so it's just kind of natural in family. The best thing about my job is by far the people. People that you meet, people that you talk to, even the people that you work with. It's been great 6 years working on the water, and I hope it just keeps getting better. So Lock 45 was actually built as a temporary lock, and it opened in July 26th of 1915. It was built as a temporary lock because the full-size lock was supposed to be built in Little Go Home Bay, but was never completed. So that's why the lock is only 80 feet by 23 feet wide. It was only supposed to be a temporary lock, and then after that, a small craft channel. Also, there is a swing bridge that we have at the lock, and it is the busiest manual lock on the Trent-Severn Waterway. So unlike other locks, Port-Severn's manual. So we have to use sweeps and valves in order to open up the gates and to open up the butterfly valves located within the gates. The process takes about 10 minutes going up and 8 minutes going down. We load the boats just like every other lock does, but instead of having hydraulics to close the gates, we have to use manpower. We have 2-person sweeps, so it makes it a little easier if you have somebody next to you, but you can do it by yourself too. What makes this lock special is it made Port-Severn Port-Severn. Before the lock was installed here, it was kind of a logging area, but the lock itself helped with tourism. It helped with a lot of people coming around the lock station. It also helped with just residents. My family especially was moved here because of the lock and also because of the logging. So it's been 100+ years, but it's been a great help to Port-Severn. Just don't forget, when you leave the lock at Port-Severn by boat, red's always on your right, and there's never a dull moment in Port-Severn.
Just to wrap this up a little bit of some acknowledgements. The Great Lakes Cruising Club I did a presentation on the Trent-Severn Waterway, so I had those slides. The Aurelia Museum of Art and History for its support of everything in Ontario, everything in the Aurelia area. And so do continue monitoring, joining, visiting the museum. Ontario Waterway Cruises, who allowed us to use some segments. More can be seen for YouTube in YouTube under the Trent-Severn Waterway. You'll see the Kawartha Voyager and some other parts of the cruise. Canadian Powered Sail Squadron for support of navigation, learning, and safe boating in the area. Parks Canada, which now is responsible for the Heritage Canal, and Rogers TV. And finally, thanks for taking some time to learn more about some local history. And I guess we'll turn it back to the organizers to see if there are any questions that have come up over the last hour.
So Charlie, I did see some questions coming in. And as well as that, a couple of comments thanking you for your work tonight also. The one question that I saw come in from Anne says, how much does it cost to go from Trenton to Georgian Bay?
Well, actually, the way they've set it up, there's based on the size of your vessel. So if you're in a Sea-Doo, that would be considered to be the minimum. Well, you pay for 12 feet. And if you go to the Parks Canada website, there's a spot marked fees. I happen to have a season pass for locking through and one for mooring overnight. So it's not free. It used to be in the early stages when we first were boating, or I was first boating in the 50s. Most certainly it was free, but in time it's pretty expensive to maintain that waterway. So they put some fee charges on. So,
and a similar question, two-part question. Do you need to reserve spaces to go through the locks? And how long does it take to travel the Trent-Severn Waterway?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. You should allow about a week. We went from Toronto to Port Severn running every day, and it took about 6 days. So you should allow for that. I mean, it depends on what you're planning to do. If you want to sit back and enjoy the scenery, it's going to take a bit longer. When you get up into the open lakes like Sturgeon Lake, Lake Couchiching, Lake Simcoe, you can speed up your vessel if you have that capability. And I guess the other part of that is you can't really reserve. It's sort of first come, first serve. The commercial thing, like the Kawartha Voyager, they always have a spot because they need to be tied up at night. But most everyone else, well, that's when you get there. But I find if you travel sort of after 11 in the morning, in the next couple hours, you'll get something. If you wait towards the end of the day when it's closing time, it could be a little more difficult. The larger the boat, more challenging maybe to find a spot later in the day.
Okay. And on the note of sightseeing, David is wondering if you've tried the new restaurant at Lock 42.
I would like to say yes, but I haven't. And I've been getting questions from people in the Great Lakes Cruising Club saying, what's it like? My relatives have been there and said that it's quite good. And so, if you can get there and it's not a far travel from Aurelia, I think you'd be delighted because the local reports are it's good stuff. So I'll have to check that out if I ever do this again, because I'm sure I'm going to get asked again.
Yeah, check it out and report back. I see Don is letting us know in the chat that it is quite nice.
So I didn't want to mention his name, but yeah,
good reports coming in.
And he's fussy about what he eats.
So Michael is asking about the book A Respectable Ditch that you mentioned at the end there. They just received it as a gift. Would you recommend it?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
And I just see somebody made a comment. They said that they like the mac and cheese and the fish and chips at the Lock restaurant. So there you are.
Oh, I love fish and chips. Pam is wondering, any idea how much it costs to build the Trent-Severn?
I don't have a firm number because the first building in the Bobcaygeon area, that piece from Bobcaygeon and the next 3 locks they built ran around $15,000, but we're now into 30 million, I guess, as it is now, the way it exists. So, but that's probably a number I can get. So that's a good number to have. Thank you. Mm-hmm. It's large numbers, and they're paying regularly to maintain it. It's being very well maintained. Redoing washrooms, redoing lock walls. Quite impressive.
David's wondering if you know anything about the current rules for anchoring at Big Chief. It says there are marking buoys there now. Any idea what the current rules are?
Well, they put the marking buoys there to leave a pathway through the middle, because I think something happened one day where they couldn't get an emergency vessel in to help somebody because people were everywhere. So you stay outside of the mooring buoys. There was a talk that there was someone going around collecting some money, but that didn't materialize in the last couple of years, and I don't foresee it doing it this year either. But there's lots written. I guess it's one of those Google things that, anchoring at Chief's Island. And so it means they have to hire someone. You can't go ashore because it is sacred ground. So, and if there's a dock there, that's only for the people from the band that are allowed to walk on the island.
Yeah. Okay, I have 4 questions in the Q&A left, and I'm gonna end it after that 4th one, Charlie. So
okay.
The first one from Sheila is, what is the minimum draft?
5 feet. And the draft is from the water line on your boat, to the bottom. And if you have a sailboat that draws more than 5 feet of water, you could have issues. Canal Lake seems to get pretty weedy. So, but there are boats that come through. They unstep their mast and go through. But if you get more than 5 feet, you need to talk to the the Trent-Severn Waterway in Peterborough and see where they're at, because there are high water times, so it could be more than 5, but that's the way they advertise it.
Bruce is wondering if you know anything about the renovations at Port Severn. Do you know what they're building?
Yeah, they were building a new bridge across, and I think that's just about completed. And it was going to be a little bit higher, but not much. And I think the other one, there was a concern that it was, it had reached its limits. So I'm glad that because it services a lot of people through that area now that there's a lot of buildup and there's marinas and so forth. So, but I think it's about done. So they're open, or will be.
Okay. Moses is saying they've heard that the skills to run the big chute are retiring and maintaining is becoming an issue. Have you noticed anything, shutdowns due to maintenance, anything like that?
Yes, indeed. It happened a lot last summer that they had a valve issue. And so the lock staff really aren't capable. You need divers, scuba stuff, the whole business. So most certainly there were some days where it wasn't open. It was down for maybe 2 days at a time. Not every day, not all summer, but off and on, enough to be a nuisance. And there are notices to shipping, notices to mariners. And if you ask at Lock 42 before you go, or Lock 45 or the Marine Railway, how's it doing up there? But yes, it's getting older, and like in 1960s it was built. I remember them bringing cement trucks in on barges so they could pour the cement. I would think that they're working hard to maintain it, but it's getting tired, and they will probably have to spend some extra money. So yes, you might find it shut down.
Okay. And I'm going to take just this last question for the evening from Pam. Do you know how many locks have power?
The answer to that, if I can name them, there's if you go to the Parks Canada website with the Trent-Severn Waterway, it tells you, but there's about 4. There's the ones that I use, of course, there's lots of power at Fenland Falls, not free, but around $10 a boat. And then over at Buckhorn Lock, then there's one down further. It's not at Cabra, I want to say Ashburn, but it's in the Campbellford area. And that's on, there are about 4 altogether, and there's none sort of from here really north at this point. So I would say 3 or 4, but it is on the website as to which locks have power. Mistakenly, it said Rosedale, but Rosedale didn't have power last year.
Okay, that's great. Well, Charlie, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them with the time allowed.